record on this computer. Right, that should say recording on your various screens, does it?
It does.
It does. Right. Well, with that case,
yes.
we're good. Excellent. Right. Okay. And where's my fox gone? There it is. Here. Right. Is that number one, Paul? That's what you want to start with, isn't it?
I've just got your desktop at the moment.
Okay. It's probably just a little delay.
That's number
We're
one.
up now. We've got about a 5-second delay, I think, but
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's number one. Okay. Right. Evening, everybody. This, hopefully, it will be vaguely coherent. I'm going to take you through a little bit of my history of photographing foxes. So I've started this evening with one that I took back in 2005 with a tiny little Olympus C370 3.2 megapixel point and click camera. And I put this one up because it's still one of my favorite shots. But it just also demonstrates how you don't need, you know, amazing equipment to take good photos or interesting photos of wildlife. This was a young fox that was coming into our garden. It's probably about 6 months old, maybe slightly less at the time. And it was one of the first times I started to get low down and close to the animals. And started to get low angle shots, and that becomes a theme in a lot of what I then move on to do. It also taught me that I need to cut the grass more often, as you can see that horrible streak of grass coming up across his face there. But it was a nice early shot that I just wanted to, which got me into, one of the ones that got me into photographing foxes. They'd started to appear in our garden after our dog died, and with no dog in the garden, foxes started to appear, and that really was quite astounding for us. I really didn't know what they were at first, but gradually we got to know them, and we got very friendly with a vixen and a dog fox, a couple of whom will be featured as we move on. Move on to the next slide, please, Andrew.
Okay. There we go. How's the delay going?
Wait for that to come up on screen. Yeah, this is one of my favorite shots. And if you've seen me on Facebook or any of my other sites, it's the one I generally use as my avatar. It was taken on a 40D with, I think, probably the Sigma macro lens. It's and with flash, it's, you know, a super close-up shot of a fox. And it's got one of those expressions on its face. It was probably eating. Food and foxes go together really well. If you want to get close-up photos of foxes, basically you have to feed them. And then they will do all sorts of things for you, and you can learn to position them in the garden, get them to stand where you want them to go, and really get to know them. Not all foxes will behave well, though. They're quite gentle, but some foxes will, you know, habituate extremely well and comfortably. Others from the same litter, the same group, will stay shy, and you'll almost never get a glimpse of them. But this was a really cooperative young fox. I'd probably given it Marky biscuit or something like that, so it's probably eating. But I could put the camera inches away from his face, and he really didn't care at all. I've tried to get a shot like that ever since, another one like that, and I've never got anything as good as that one. It's genuinely one of my favorite shots.
Can I ask a question, Paul?
Sure.
Do they react to the flash in the early days, or generally do they take no notice?
Depends on the fox. It literally depends on the fox. Some foxes never take any notice of flash. Other foxes, the merest noise or light and they're off. Noise tends to spook them more than the light, though. Foxes actually, what's interesting about foxes, their eyesight is not very good. They tend to do everything by hearing and smell. And for example, if it's a windy night and there's a lot of rustling around, they are much, much more skittish than they are if it's a calm, quiet night. So it's noise more than anything will scare them off. So flash, some of them like, some of them don't mind it at all. Others run a mile as soon as they see it. So you just have to get used to the foxes, and it's random. And I've got foxes now, some who come close and some who will never come out at all. So it's one of those things. I've been doing this for about 15 years, so I just know that if you're lucky with a fox, that's great. It tends to help if you get to know the fox when it's really young. I probably got to know this one as a young cub of sort of 8 weeks old, and if you get familiar with them, then it becomes a lot easier. Once they get to about 6 months old, if their first encounters are then, it's much harder. So a lot of these foxes I've known from when they were very young indeed.
Cool.
Okay, move on to the next slide.
Okay, it should appear in a second. Have you got it?
This next one, when it comes up, is
Should be there
one
now.
of I've included this because it's a genuine nature shot, and I don't have that many. Most of my fox photos are in the garden, but there are some that are out in the wild. And this was at a local site where I'd been out photographing kestrels, and it was towards the end of the day. And as I was walking back to the car park, I noticed in this sort of path, which I tended to call Rabbit Alley because the rabbits were always there, that a vixen was out hunting. And I just stood back and watched for probably 5 or 10 minutes while she stalked those rabbits. She didn't get anything in the end and eventually wandered off. But it was an amazing just to watch her and the rabbits slowly starting to hop towards that shrub on the left of the shot to get out of her way. And eventually she gave up and let them go and wandered off. But there were plenty of rabbits there. But it was really interesting just to watch her standing there and stalking them, and occasionally get disappearing into the shrub and then coming out again. I took this just for the technical details. It is on a 40D camera with the Canon 400 5.6, the non-stabilized version, a lens I absolutely hated. Lots of people really like that lens. I absolutely hated it and eventually traded it in. But this is really about a photo about the setting. And again, one of the ones I really like from relatively early on in my photography pathway. Okay, move on to the next one, which I think will show another rabbit, but a very different type of shot when it comes up.
Okay, I've clicked it, so.
Yeah. Yeah, this next one, when it comes up,
can you see it?
It's not there yet, but it's probably on its way. I'm running a separate screen here, so I know what order they're coming in. Wait for it.
Okay, well, yeah, it's definitely up. It should be there.
Okay, right, there it is. I hope everybody can see that. This was taken on the Sussex University campus where I was working at the time. With the 100-400 lens, so slightly better lens as far as I was concerned. There was a vixen and had a den under that concrete bridge. That's the edge of a concrete bridge which cut across the middle of the campus, and right in the middle of the campus where there were people going backwards and forwards all day. She dug a hole at the side of the concrete and had a den with several cubs in it. And she used to go hunting in the morning and all through the morning, bringing back rabbits from the local hills. And this was her bringing back a rabbit for one of the cubs. You know, students used to stand and watch. Some thought it was really cute till they realized that the rabbit was dead. Others were fascinated and others really didn't like to see this. But what she does with that rabbit is she then gives it to the cub to try to see what the cub does with it, and it drags it back to the den. So she was obviously partly teaching the cubs what to do with it. So I've included this as a real example of sort of behavioural interaction between two foxes. And they were doing this right in the middle of a busy campus. I think this shot was probably taken at lunchtime. My photography was mornings and lunchtime, and then sometimes early evening. This one's in at lunchtime because you can tell from the way the shadows are falling there. But again, for me, it was a really nice action shot. And if you look closer, you may not be able to see it on your screens. There's a little bit of blood on the vixen's nose from where she's made the kill. Okay, the next one.
Okay, I have pressed the button. Let's see how long it takes to appear for you.
Right. Yeah. Okay. This was a dog fox. This is one of the first foxes we got to know, and he was a fantastic fox. And he was visiting our garden for probably about 4 years, which is a long time for a fox. But he caught mange a couple of times during the period he was visiting. And you can see how badly the mange has affected his hindquarters there. I've included that because it's a really typical shot of what a fox with mange looks like. And if you watch foxes, you'll see lots of scruffy foxes, particularly this time of year. But hopefully you won't see too many foxes where you see these huge bare patches appearing on their skin, which is sarcoptic mange. If you're familiar with a fox, it's treatable, and we treated this fox a couple of times successfully over the years that we knew him with the help of a local wildlife centre who provided us with meat treated with ivermectin, which had a few drops of that in, and we'd feed him that once a week for 4 weeks. And it was remarkable how it cleared it up. The mite that gets under their skin really irritates them, and they scratch and scratch and scratch. And the biggest danger to them is it becomes septic, and that then is what kills foxes with mange. It tends to occur in overcrowded environments. So it may have been at that time there were too many foxes in the area. It can also affect their eyes, which is unpleasant. But I just wanted to show an example of a fox which was not in the greatest of health, but also just to mention that if you do see foxes like this, they can be treated. But it tends to be if you're familiar with them, because you need to make sure the right fox gets the treated food. And with this fox, we were able to just wait. When he'd turn up, we could literally just give him.
You've got to send me the link.
Yeah.
She didn't
Graham, can you mute yourself, please, Graham?
Yeah. So
Graham, can you mute yourself, please?
Sorry.
That's all right. Thank you.
Okay.
Next one.
That's all right. Should we, next one? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The button has been pressed. It should appear.
Yeah. This next one is another really what I think is a really interesting behavioural shot. It's a fox up a tree. This was again a fox that was a very regular visitor, and along the side of our garden we've got a number of beech trees. They're not particularly huge. They were, I think, originally a hedge, but they've grown into trees, and lots of wood pigeons nest in them. And this particular fox took to climbing up into the trees, scrambling up into the trees, and then hunting pigeons' eggs while it was up there. It was absolutely fascinating to watch him hunt. He'd walk in a very stiff-legged way through the trees, and he always looked like he was about to fall out. And on occasions he did fall out, but it's quite rare to see foxes up trees. But there's an example of how good they are at climbing. Essentially, if a cat can get there, so can a fox, and that's one of the examples. I thought of putting one of the ones where they're on the roof, but I thought this is slightly more interesting because it's more unusual to see them in the tree. But he was really good climber, this one. We've had a couple of foxes over the years that do this. Most of them don't, but this was a really unusual one, and I used to watch him in the trees. You know, where's the fox gone? Oh, he's up the tree. And it was one of the weirdest things at first to watch. Somewhere on my website I've got a little bit of video of him as well doing this. Okay, next one.
Okay, I've pressed the button. Somewhere in the cyberspace.
Okay, this is a very bold vixen who we had visiting for probably a couple of years. I just had to include a picture of a fox in snow. I think they look wonderful in snow. She was very, very comfortable with us, and I could sort of position her pretty much anywhere I wanted to. So she was one of those foxes I could really work with. But this was really, really nice to see her out in the snow. It was a fairly thick snowfall. I think it was probably about 2010. So the garden was nice and thick, and I just wanted to include a picture of a fox in snow because I think they're made for it. Okay, that's I've not got a lot else to say about that other than it's just a fox in snow, but I think everybody should take a photo of a fox in snow. They just look wonderful. Okay, moving on now to some of my more recent stuff. I think this may have been up on the critique site at one point. It's a photo of one of the young cubs. It's taken a couple of years ago. and it's a 12-week-old cub, roughly 12 weeks old. I would think so. He'd probably known it for sort of 5 or 6 weeks, so it's already quite comfortable with us. It's just taking it in the through the grass, long grass, to try and get a more natural feel to it. Because one of the problems with photographing foxes in gardens is it's really easy to get a fox eating something, and where they're sort of got their head down and they're eating food, and that's loads and loads of photos like that. And I have hundreds of them because it's one of the ways I get the foxes comfortable with the camera. But after a while, if you're lucky, they start to just behave as themselves in the garden, particularly if they're out in the day. And you can take much more natural looking shots. And this is an example of a much more natural looking shot of a fox taken in a garden setting. You can just about see the decking that it's on, so to the right of the photo. But it's much less obviously a garden than some of my other stuff. So that's one of the reasons I put this one in. And I really like the lighting on that one as well. It was late in the day, and there was some really nice sunlight on the fox. Okay, next one.
Okay, should appear in a moment.
It's just a really relaxed fox. I like this shot. Again, it was one of the foxes that had been around. I think this is probably the mother of this. I think this, when I took this, it's probably the mother of the fox I'm photographing now. There's a whole generational flow, so we can probably track them back. So she was a vixen. She was very, very relaxed, as you can see, and she used to just loll about in the garden for hours. And I could position her and move around and take as many photos as I wanted. I've got hundreds of shots similar to this, where she would just be lying in the garden, just resting out, keeping away from the cubs. It's a nice hot sunny day, and that's just a very nice relaxed fox. That was taken with the 1DX2 and I think a 200mm prime, which I no longer have. Okay, next, I think next one, 2 more. I think there's a couple more coming.
Yeah, we got this one plus 2 after, yeah.
Yeah. There's 2 after. I'll move through these quite quickly. This is just another example of a young fox in a garden setting. Again, that's the usefulness of leaving fairly wild areas in the garden, is that you can get shots like this which don't look like they're taken in a suburban garden. Again, I'm low down. I've got quite close to the fox. I've used a fairly shallow depth of field, I think, on this, fairly shallow aperture, wide aperture. Again, late in the day, so nice light. And it's another example of just the kind of shots that I like to get. I'm not worried about the grasses in front of it. It's a very natural looking shot. Okay, the next one.
Okay, Paul. Yeah, press the button.
Yeah. Oh, there's the, okay. I'll move on fairly quickly through this. This is an action shot taken at night with a flash. I really like this shot. I really wish they'd been standing, but they will eventually go up onto their hind legs, but they went out of frame when I was shooting this. Shooting at night with flash, which is what I mainly do, has some challenges, mainly getting the focus. I rely on the flash lamp, the red beam from that to capture focus. I can't see what I'm doing. It works pretty well, but it can be a little bit hit and miss, particularly when they start to move. But I just caught these two as they were starting to go at each other, to challenge each other. They're both fairly young foxes. But this is one of the best ones I got of that, because there was nothing in between and I was very close to them at the time. That's the advantage of having a fairly short lens on the camera as well, is that you can fit these things in. Okay, move on to the next one, which are a couple more, I think, 2 more. Move through these quite quickly. But there's more. This is a very typical shot. This was taken back in 2013, but it's very typical of the kind of thing I'm doing now. I actually reprocessed it for this, but it's a portrait shot of a fox. There's a little bit of peanuts on the ground, I think, around it, which is probably what kept it still. So I give them peanuts, that keeps them there quicker more than meat. If they get meat, they eat it and go. If they've got peanuts, they'll stay and nibble. So you can keep them in one place easier with peanuts. Again, I'm shooting from slightly below the height of the fox. We've got a tiered garden. So I get lots of shots from below the animal, which brings them out into the frame. So that's another part of the technique. Its eyes here are slightly blue, which is typical of young foxes when they get caught by the flash. Okay, and move on to the final photo, which is a very recent shot. And here is a very recent shot. This was one of the first shots I took with off-camera flash. So thanks to Paul Barrow for that, who provided the second flash unit that I'm using in his recent sale. But it really has made a difference, and it's given me an opportunity to work rather more with this fox in particular. She's 2 years old. She's the mother of we've not seen her cubs, but she's had 2 litters. And she's a very cooperative fox. And she poses pretty well, and I can use an external flash as well. Some of the other foxes get a bit spooked by 2 lights going off, but she's very comfortable with it. And again, I've shot with a reduced flash at an angle. I'm shooting upwards, which kills most of the background. I do a little bit of darkening around them, but basically that's pretty much as it comes out of the camera, because I tend to shoot deliberately to get that dark background. Occasional bits of tree and things I might paint out, but generally that's the shots that I'm aiming for. And I take lots of these, shooting upwards at the fox from quite close in to kill the background as much as I can. And I think that brings me pretty much to the end of the presentation, which I hope made sense and that you could hear me. And thank you very much indeed for asking me to do this.
Brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Paul. You can unmute. Let's give Paul a round of applause, because it's never easy talking in front of a whole Zoom room of people. So well done, Paul. Well done. Most people are still muted, I think, but no, that was really good. We haven't got, we're about halfway through. So if anybody has a burning question, we could take a couple of questions, but maybe later, if you don't get a chance to ask Paul a question about the foxes, then put them onto the Tech Lounge, and Paul can answer some stuff on there maybe. What I would say before we have a question is, it's not easy to do this. They may be coming to the garden, but it's a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I really like the progression that we saw there with Paul's work. And I think particularly, as you can see at the end now, with using the off-camera flash and the second flash, I think we're going to see a lot of really, really good stuff over the next year or two. So I'm quite excited to see how it all develops. Does anybody have a question? Anyone have a question?
Everybody's quiet.
Basil, are you asking a question, or are you just content with your wine? No. Okay. All right. Okay. We'll put. If you do have a question, then you think of it after, then pop it on the Tech Lounge for Paul. Really enjoyed that. John, do you want to take over?
Yes.
Let me just stop sharing for a moment.
Yeah, if you stop, and I'll go onto the screen share.
I have stopped, and it is over to you. If we can. What time are we? We're about 8. We've got about half an hour, John. So you've got plenty of time to chat, and we can take questions if we need to.
Okay.
At the end.
Well, thank you for that, Paul. That was fantastic to see those images, and it shows you've got a real love for those creatures coming into the back garden. Have your neighbours got any chickens? That's all I wondered.
Yes, we have got neighbours across the road who have got chickens.
Oh dear.
But they've got them well protected.
Oh, that's good then. So you still get on. You haven't fallen out. That's fantastic. Yeah. What I wanted to look at is not yet. Yeah, I wanted to look at a sort of a procedure in Photoshop, which is common to all images and I think all people. So it's nice and generic for everybody. And it's about making selective adjustments. I've got a picture on screen. We can see there's some problems with it. I mean, the first thing with Photoshop use, or Lightroom use for that matter, is always going to be, what do I need to fix? So you have a bit of a plan to start with. And we can see here that I've shot this to expose for the sky. We've got quite a bright sky and consequently quite a dark foreground, something that generally happens. Skies in the UK are about 2 stops brighter than foregrounds. Sometimes 1 stop, sometimes 3 stops difference, but generally it's about 2. And if you're not using a grad, or then you end up with this kind of effect and you have to fix it afterwards in software. But very often we do this kind of thing within Lightroom or within Adobe Camera Raw, and we bring up the foreground. But in Photoshop, this is kind of the old school way of doing it, but it's still a really useful way to learn about doing it, because you can have lots of advantages by doing this procedure in Photoshop. What we've got here, I've got the layers panel already up on screen. And what you can see there is that's my background. That's the image. So that's the one out the camera. This is my JPEG here that's kind of got an awkward imbalance in the exposure. But what we can do is actually switch on all our curves adjustment layers here, and we can basically repaint the scene with light. We can relight the scene and change the way it looks and get some of that kind of hand-printed feel. And we can take that in all kinds of different directions. But when you do this in Lightroom or in Adobe Camera Raw, the way to do it would be with the adjustment brush. But there are advantages to adjustment layers because you can kind of switch them on and off and try them. You can see before and afters and this kind of thing, and actually check your progress as you go and change your mind very, very rapidly. So I'm just going to get rid of all of these first of all, and we'll start from scratch, and I'll just show you briefly how to do it. So it's quite a simple technique, but it's a really useful one. So there's our image, and we have to decide what we want to do. Now, if we just make an adjustment layer, we can change the image globally as you would in Lightroom or in Camera Raw, and we just move a slider or we make an adjustment and the whole thing changes. So if, for example, I were to create a curves adjustment layer, so we'll just click on the adjustment layer icon here in the layers panel, and we'll select curves. We bring up our curves palette. Let's move that over there. We can make it all brighter, we can make it all darker, but we can't make some of it brighter and some of it darker. So we're making a global adjustment in that instance. That isn't what we want to do. So let's get rid of that. I'll just drag that to the trash. We're going to make another adjustment, but we're going to first of all select the area we want to adjust. And that's a really important part of the procedure of doing this. So to make a selection, you need to have a selection tool. Now this is this bunch up here, really, up in the toolbox. And the most useful one in general is going to be the freehand lasso tool, this one here. So what we're going to do is draw around the part we want to change. So it's going to be roughly around about here. It's this area that I need to make a bit brighter to balance against the sky. So I've made that selection. So now I'm all set to change it. Well, if I do change it now, I'm going to get a horrible hard edge. If I just quickly do it, we'll just make that curves adjustment layer. If I push that up, you see that horrendous edge. That is what we don't want. So what we need is a nice soft edge blend, a bit like using feather if you're using a brush in Lightroom or Camera Raw. So we've got to soften that edge first of all. So I'll just backtrack. I'll just hit Control or Command and Z a couple of times to get back to my selection. So there's my hard edge selection. And what I need to do is feather that selection, because that's the way we do it. And we're going to feather it by a certain number of pixels on either side of this line. So if I go up to Select, down to Modify, and choose Feather, I bring up my feather selection dialog, and I can put in any size I like. Now for big, broad brush feathering, you want to have around somewhere between 100 and 300 pixels, that kind of thing. So I'll go for 250, and we've made it. Now, how much you feather by kind of depends on how big the area is and depends on your experience, the resolution of the image. So that isn't always the best way to do it, but I'll show you another way to feather in just a short while. So we've got a soft edge now. So now if I make that adjustment, I can bring up my curves palette, and then I can push it up, and we get quite a subtle change, and that looks much better. Now we've brightened that area. It looks a little bit low in contrast. So if I just make another point on the curves, drag it down a touch, we get a little bit more contrast injected into this area. And now that's looking okay, really. That's almost balanced the exposure. It's not quite right yet, because what I'd like to do is bring up this area too. Be nice if I could spill a little bit of extra light, just a little bit of dappled sunlight on this rock in the foreground. So to do that, we can do exactly the same thing again. So we're just doing the same process. Again, we've just got to select that part of the image. So we've got our lasso tool. Let's just quickly draw around this rock down in the bottom corner, something like that. There we go. And that's that area selected. We've got to feather it. Now I could go up to Select, Modify, Feather. Oops, I've got a load of zoom controls appeared. Go away.
Yeah, they just appear, John, sometimes when you're share screening at the top and a bit random.
Yes,
but
it's like slightly irritating, so I can't get to me. Can't get to me menu.
No one else can see them. It's a slightly disconcerting, isn't it?
That's all right. It just covered the button I was about to head for. But anyway, I've made that selection, and we've got a hard edge selection, remember, so we need to feather it. I'm not going to that same process. I'm going to hit this button here in the options bar called Select and Mask. That gives me another way of feathering, and it's down here. It's just a feather slider. Does exactly the same thing as the palette we saw earlier, or the command we saw earlier, but we can control it better because by moving the slider, we can see how much softening occurs. So we just ramp it up slightly, and you see that edge softening? Oops. We move it up until we get the right kind of softening, and because we've got a visual representation of the softening, it's a bit easier to decide how many pixels you're going to use. So I'll go for about 100 in this instance, and that looks okay there. I'll just click OK. And now we've got a soft edge around this line as well, so we can make another curves adjustment, or indeed any other adjustment. But I'm going to stick with curves in this example. So we click on our curves adjustment layer, or our adjustment layer icon, and select curves from the list. We've got a different curves palette now. We can go up or down to make that rock different colors. What I'll do, I'll just give it a slight increase in exposure. Got to be really subtle with curves, just small changes on the curve. And then I could do with introducing a little bit of warmth there. We've got some sort of vaguely autumnal colors in this scene. It was taken in November, I think. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of red and a little bit of yellow. And I can do that in curves as well. Just click on this menu here where it says RGB. We've got red, green, and blue. So I want a bit of red. So we'll have some red. I'll push up very slightly. You can see that color changing. So we don't want that much, just a tiny tweak. And then I'll select the blue channel, because blue gives us yellow. Yellow is the opposite of blue. So if we pull it down, we'll get yellow coming in. So we're just got a tiny bit of yellow in there. And that gives me a bit of extra warmth. And because we're using adjustment layers, something you can't do in Lightroom or in Adobe Camera Raw, we can switch it on and off to see if we like the effect. And if we think...
I was going to ask that, John, actually, and you've kind of just done it. But, you know, in a sense that for those people that aren't, that are generally doing this in Lightroom with adjustment brushes, one of the reasons that one of the good ways is the fact that you can switch it on and off, isn't it? Like you're showing now. Plus, I'm guessing you could, if you're one of these people that you're going to end up with lots of layers and you want to have a simple way of identifying which layer is which, if you want to go and adjust them later, is you can just change the name of them to the areas, yeah? Yeah,
that's a really good point. So if I wanted to label this one, so I remember where it is, because I could say this, that those that were here last week, we talked about, or the week before. I lose track of time. The week before, we talked about different file formats and why PSDs or Photoshop files are good. We save all our layers and all our layer names. So yeah, if we wanted to just double click on that, just double click where it says curves 2, and we can name that rock. Now we know, whoops, I've got a double C in there. That's strange. I've got to get a new keyboard. So we call that rock, and this one here, of course, that's foreground. So we can call that FG or whatever. So we can label our layers as we go so we can keep track of what everything is. But now we've got that rock adjustment made. We could then add to that adjustment if we think, well, this rock would look great with that slightly brighter, slightly warm tone to it as well. And because we get a mask automatically when we make an adjustment layer, we can just paint that in, just like using an adjustment brush in Lightroom or Camera Raw. So if we just pick up a brush, then we need to have a white brush in this case because we're painting into black in this area here. All we've got to do, if we start painting into that rock, we get the same color coming through. And if you look at the thumbnail here, you can see in the layer mask, we've got that gray sort of shape appearing. That's because my opacity is quite low. It's always good to keep your opacity fairly low if you're painting into masks. So we can actually bring some of those red tones and that slight brightening that we had in the foreground rock, and we can paint it anywhere we like in the image. So that's quite useful. We can get a bit into this tree, get a little bit of shadow detail coming through, and we can paint away to our heart's content. And of course, again, that switching it on and off, the instant switching on and off, something you can't do in Lightroom or Camera Raw, you can just see what difference you've made. So it's really easy to check your progress as you go. So hopefully that's all clear. I'll do a couple more adjustments. I mean, I guess another thing I might like to do, Ashness Bridge, this is a very famous Lakeland scene. Some say it's beautiful, some say it's hackneyed. I think it's okay, but you do get wet feet when you shoot it. But I want to bring out that bridge a little bit more. It's getting slightly lost. So all I've got to do really is make another selection. So in we go, we'll go this sort of area here, something like that, just round the bridge. I'm doing it quite rough here. Then we need to feather that selection. And we've got to be quite careful with this one. So I'll use the select and mask route, and I'll just move up the feather. I don't need too big a feather radius because we've got quite a small selection. Something like that should be okay. I've got about 30 pixels. I'll click OK to that. Now we've got a feathered selection. All we have to do is introduce another curves adjustment layer. And then if we push our curve up, we can just bring that bridge out. And maybe we can add a little bit of red to it, just a hint, and perhaps a little bit of yellow as well. And then to kind of finish it all off, we might want to finish with a vignette. And to do that, it's exactly the same procedure. Bear in mind, all I've done is one technique here. I've ended up with 4 layers so far, but I've used curves and I've used adjustment layers and selections. So I'm just repeating the same thing. And that's the beauty of this technique, because you can use any adjustment that you can make in Photoshop can be used with exactly the same technique. So I've made my dodgy vignette round there, just drawn it again with the lasso tool. We need to get the outside of the selection rather than the inside. So I just need to go up to, I'm going to hit my zoom controls. So I'm just going to do it on the keyboard. That's Control Shift and I, which is the command for select and inverse. So that gives me the opposite of what I had selected. And now I need to feather that as well. So we need a big feather radius on here. So I'll just hit the select and mask button and I'll whack the feather up. I'm going to go for quite a big broad radius here. Let's get up to about sort of 250, 300 area. That looks pretty good. Nice fuzzy edge. Click OK. That softened the edge. Then I can do yet another curves adjustment layer. Same technique all the way through. And if I pull that curve down, I get my vignette, my slight darkening around the edge. Push it up, I get the Victorian vignette. I don't want that. Let's put it down, give it a bit of mood and atmosphere. And that's the job done. And because they're all in separate layers, I can switch them all off and go back to where I started from. That was the beginning shot. That's where we ramped up the foreground. That was our rock. And we then added this rock to it just by brushing it in. That's our bridge just being cut out, a little bit of light on there. And then we put the vignette around the edge. So hopefully you'll see it's a really simple technique, quite a repetitive technique. But if you do it a few times, you get the hang of it. And of course, with adjustment layers, you can use any of these things. That isn't even the extensive list of it. We've got a lot of adjustments we can choose from in Photoshop. You've got all these you can use. And obviously, I've used curves here because it's so versatile and one of my favorite commands within Photoshop. But you can try all of these different things and mix up some really interesting adjustments and just kind of paint your light into your picture. Okay, all right, then. Well, I hope that was useful.
It was, but hold on, because I like to challenge you.
Oh, yeah, go on then.
Honestly. Okay, so what I'd like you to show the guys now, because I think it'd be really interesting, is obviously we can all see there's some idiots parked in your shot, right? They parked in your shot, the other side of the bridge. But of course, you've got a load of layers up now. And but I think it looks like someone's having a pee, but I don't think they are. I think they're just about to walk over the bridge. Now, I'm not asking you to do a perfect clone job because I think that's unfair in this scenario. But how would you now go about? You suddenly go, oh, I didn't notice them at the start. I didn't.
With all these layers in place, how would I clone it?
Exactly.
Well, I'd have to be a bit careful. So I think what I'd do is I'd do a kind of a fake flattening. So I'd actually create a new layer and save all of the work I've done so far into a new layer and use that as my cloning starting point. Otherwise, I've got all these different adjustment layers. If there's any sort of a coloration that's occurred on this area, that's not going to work as a straight clone. So to do this area here, I'd have to, well, it would be, if you remember a shortcut, you need a lot of fingers. It's Command or Control and Alt and Shift and E. If I hit all of those together, I get this new layer at the top of the stack. Now, what that is, that's a bit like flattening the image. But what we've done is we've just condensed all of the work we've done so far. All of these layers have been slapped into this layer. So I've got a new layer at the top, and then I'd use that as my base for cloning. So to do that, I would then create another new layer because I'd clone onto a separate layer rather than just go over the top of something. So I'd create a new layer. So I'd have an empty layer at the top here. Then I'd grab my healing brush or clone tool. We could use the clone tool. I'd get in nice and tight. I want a slightly bigger brush there. and then I'd start cloning away. So the only way to do this is to chip away, because we've got a lot of twigs and branches. So yeah, thanks for that, AJ.
Well, I'm not.
And I'd start
just do a little bit of it, but yeah, don't
painting
do
him out, and I'd look to avoid repeating patterns like we've got here, because they're a telltale sign of bad cloning technique. But yeah, if we take out this chap here, and who wears a white jacket in the Lake District?
I think it's a lady.
Maybe that's why he's wearing a white jacket. The lady.
I think so. It looked like a lady. Not that it matters.
I mean, of all the colours. So yeah, and we can see they're gradually disappearing, and I could take the car out in the same way. But we don't have an automatic natural. We've got to take a bit of road from here. It would take a little while to build that and get rid of the car. But yeah, that will be the process. And you can see there.
It means now that you've got, because you've got this, if you say the extra layer where you've condensed all the other layers, you can still go back to the original layers and make adjustments if you suddenly then go, I want to brighten this or darken this area.
Yes, so long as I'm using this as a base layer, I can then make changes. But if I cloned over an area I've adjusted, then no, that would show up. So I can switch that one off that I'm using as my base, and you don't see the cloning difference. You know, we can switch it on and off. But if I did change these layers underneath that were covering the cloned area, that would show up like a sore thumb. So I would have to do that as a separate job, yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Did that make sense?
It made sense to me.
Just a very quick question,
yes,
please.
go for it.
Right, once you're happy, do you just flatten the image if you're happy with the end result?
You've got two choices.
Well, that's just my alarm telling us we're 10 minutes from an hour, so ignore that.
I think happy is, the ancient Greeks didn't have a word for happy. I think they just said eudaimonia. So that was contentment. I think what I mean is, are you ever finished with an image? Do you ever want, if you come back in a year's time, I just want to tweak that? What I normally do with a work in progress, I will save all the layers. So I'll save that as a PSD and have all of that stuff there. If I want to make a print of it, then I will simply save it out as a high quality JPEG, but I'll still save the PSD normally, because I might want to come back to it and just make a tweak to a particular layer. For example, if I think that vignette's too heavy, I can go back into that curves adjustment layer and take the vignette out or make it brighter or do whatever I want. Having that flexibility is wonderful. It's really only if you're going to stick it on the wall, in which case you're making a print. You don't ever, like you don't need to delete a RAW file just because you've turned it into a JPEG. You can keep your PSDs. Storage is cheap these days, so why not keep your work in progress?
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions? Everyone's very quiet. That's because everyone's muted.
Everyone's muted.
Either that or they've gone home. Who knows? No, actually, they haven't. I can still see they're here. Okay. If we don't have any more questions, you can stop screen sharing, John, if you want. Okay.
There we go.
Everyone's still awake. Okay. Right. Well, that's a really good time to finish, actually, because 45 minutes is about 45 minutes to 50 minutes. We think is a good sort of time to do that. So thank you again to Paul. That was really interesting, and seeing the kind of the relationship he has with the foxes. I think that's something we'd all love to be able to have is a relationship where the wildlife is coming to us. I think that's awesome, isn't it? And that was a really good demo again from John. It's an alternative way of working. We're not saying it's better than doing something in Lightroom or whatever else you use. Those are still valid ways of doing it. It's just another.
Oh yeah.
Good way of doing it, isn't it, John?
Another string to your bow in Photoshop, yeah.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to do, is to bring you different ways of working and different ideas that you can adapt and use for your own photography and your own processing. Someone sounds like someone just fell over then. Right, next week, we are so planned now with these. I have no idea who that was falling over. I think it was Basil. I think Basil's fallen off the sofa.
No, I'm not.
Oh, he's cleaning his glasses.
Oh, that's all right. We're so organised now that we already have a bit of a plan for next week, and that is we're going to transport you to the summer, or the sort of the early summer to Provence. we have two people on. I'm looking at two people who are actually in Provence right now, Joe and Rosie. They're the two looking really smug, actually, basically. That's what it is. I have persuaded Rosie to work with me on a bit of a presentation about the lavender. I've been over there with Rosie, and Rosie's lives there, as does Joe, and is able to photograph it every year. And she does all sorts of kind of mad, wonderful things like photographing naked Russians. Apparently, we're not allowed to see the pictures of the naked Russians, and it's probably just as well. Yes, a thumbs down from Rosie on that one. But Rosie and I are going to work on a little presentation for you, something a little bit different there. And who knows, maybe that's somewhere we can do a trip together in next year or maybe the year after, because we don't know how long this pandemic's going to go on for. But that would be really cool, wouldn't it? So we'll put something.
Is that where the shot of Putin on horseback was taken?
Could be. That may have been one of Rosie's. Who knows? She's made a lot of money on that. Okay. So before we go, are there any other questions? Anything to do with the free access? Anything to do with PhotoBuzz?
Yes, Andrew. I've forgotten my password for PhotoBuzz.
Oh, no. Well, that's it. You're out then. That's it. You're never getting back in.
On my desktop, it comes up as a series of dots, and I just OK it and I get in. But I can't access the members part of the website from the laptop. Okay. Is there any way I can reset the password to deal with that problem?
Yeah, if you can get in, you can. Yes, you can. Just email me. Just drop me an email, and I'll go into the admin, find your password, and email it back to you.
Yeah,
all right.
Brilliant.
If anyone else has that
address, should I use?
If you can use the contact form if you like. Oh no, you can't get into it, can you? Okay. Have you got a pen there?
I have, yeah.
All right. It's really easy. Just email Andrew at photo-buzz.com. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good.
With that problem with stored passwords, because they're stored in your web browser, you'll find that if you dig deep into the preferences within your web browser, you'll normally find what the stored passwords are. You can actually retrieve them via that. But yeah, email Andrew and we'll send you that. So
a lot easier to email me, John, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, it'll be quicker. Yeah,
exactly. It'll give me something to do. I mean, hey, what the hell? I don't need the tea. Right. Anybody else? Sorry, who was that?
I miss you all. I just miss you all.
Oh,
that's sweet. But that's your phone go. It's your boyfriend calling you, was it, on the phone?
I don't have a boyfriend.
No, it was mine.
Boyfriends. There's millions of them.
That was Naomi's. Okay, fair enough.
Hey,
I know you do. Yes.
AJ, when does the free access start?
Right. Oh, up there. Sorry. When you say, can you say who's speaking to me? Because it takes me a second to work it, and obviously with the sound it's difficult. The free access, I'm going to switch on literally when we finish this meeting. Okay, so it will appear where people sign up. So if somebody goes to the sign up part on the front end of PhotoBuzz, where you know it's got the 6-month membership, etc. Next to it there, it has the free access. So somebody goes in, they sign up, they have to give us their email details, their email address, and their general address, bits and pieces, but they don't have to pay a penny, and no money will be taken from them at any time. Obviously, we will hope that they then decide that they liked it and they want to stick around, and they'll get a membership subscription. But we are
membership for free.
Sorry?
Can I get membership?
No.
For a year?
In fact, for that for asking that, your membership's going to be doubled immediately. I just need to go into the admin side and deal with you exactly.
Okay. AJ, quickly.
That sounds so sexy. You can deal with me.
Thanks a lot.
AJ, are you gonna? Sorry, me up here. Chris.
Chris. Yes.
We could actually probably all email out the camera clubs if we're a member of one.
Yeah, sure.
To say, hey, this is available.
Yeah.
How about putting more work on you? Could you provide a suggested form of words?
Yeah, can do. Not tonight though, but I will do that. I mean, obviously, I was really officially going to do it on the newsletter on Friday, but yeah, tomorrow we'll come up with something there as well. But yes, I mean, on Facebook, you know, we will put it on the Facebook page as well. That's open to the public and do bits and pieces there with it. So, but yeah, so obviously, you know, we invite anybody to come in. We hope we won't have any problems with it. I can't think we will because they can't actually do anything. So, you know, the more the merrier to have a look, because hopefully some people will stick around. I'm guessing lots of people probably need to go. So if you need to go now, that's fine. Just disappear. Otherwise, I'm quite happy to take some more questions before we disappear.
Hey, Jay.
Yes.
Howard.
Hi, Howard.
Just a quick one. When they free access, how far back in the lounge can they scroll?
Only what you can scroll back to.
Which is a lot.
Well, if you think you've written something in there that gives your bank account details, Howard, I would suggest you look back and do it. I mean, to be honest, you should, really should be doing that anyway. Obviously, I've been watching the lounge. I mean, there's a normal chit chat, but I don't think there's anything major in there recently that I've spotted, unless you know better.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Silence. Good. Okay. Well, that's great. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much again for joining us this evening, and we will no doubt chat to some of you on the lounge, see you on Facebook, and we will see you all hopefully next week. Bye, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Bye. Bye.